Hi everyone, this is Eos, and today we're going to talk about the new spoilers for the upcoming set, Phyrexia All Will Be One. In this set, we will revisit Mirrodin for the third time, but it's the first time we will be seeing a fully completed plane. In this product, there will be many different versions of the same card, due to the ever-increasing variety of card treatments that are being pushed out every set, so look out for those. This set's first mechanic is Toxic. The keyword followed by a number means that the player dealt combat damage by the creature will get a set number of infect counters on them regardless of the amount of damage dealt. Next we have Corrupted. This mechanic powers up cards as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters on them, which will make getting in those early toxic attacks quite important if you rely on this. We also have oil counters in this set. They are the Phyrexian version of charge counters. And finally, we have the For Mirrodin mechanic, which is also a reskinned old mechanic. It works the same way Living Weapon did, except the token it creates is a 2/2. Anyway, let's get into the spoilers. Against All Odds is a sorcery for 3 and a white mana that has choose one or both. Exile target artifact or creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, or return target artifact or creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Annex Sentry is a 1/4 artifact creature, Phyrexian Cleric, for 2 and a white mana that has Toxic 1, and when Annex Sentry enters the battlefield, exile target artifact creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or less until Annex Sentry leaves the battlefield. Apostle of Invasion is a 4/4 Phyrexian Angel for 4 and 2 white mana with flying, and if an opponent is corrupted, that is, if they have 3 or more poison counters on them, it has double strike. Basilica Shepherd is a Phyrexian Angel for 3 and 2 white mana with flying, and when Basilica Shepherd enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Bladed Ambassador is a 3/1 Phyrexian Soldier for 1 and a white mana that enters the battlefield with an oil counter and has pay 1 and remove an oil counter from it to give it indestructible until end of turn. Charge of the Mites is an instant for 2 and a white mana that has choose 1. Charge of the Mites deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target creature or planeswalker, or create 2 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1 and this creature can't block. Complete Devotion is an instant for 1 and a white mana that says target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If that creature has Toxic, draw a card. Crawling Chorus is a 1/1 Phyrexian Horror for 1 white mana that has Toxic 1, and when it dies, create a 1/1 Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1 and this creature can't block. Duelist of Deep Faith is a 2/2 Phyrexian Soldier for 1 and a white mana that has Toxic 1, and as long as it's your turn, Duelist of Deep Faith has first strike. Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, is a 4/7 legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, for 4 and a white mana that has Vigilance, and if a permanent entering the battlefield caused a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, and permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger. Basically a one-sided Panharmonicon and Torpor Orb. The Eternal Wanderer is a planeswalker for 4 and 2 white mana. It comes into play with 5 loyalty, and it has a static effect that says that no more than 1 creature can attack it each combat, and her loyalty abilities are +1 to exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step. 0 to create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with double strike. -4 to, for each player, choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. Cleansing Raptor is a 2/2 Phyrexian bird for 2 and a white mana that has flying, Toxic 1, and when this enters the battlefield, another target creature you control with Toxic gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. Goldwarden's Helm is an equipment for 2 and a white mana that has For Mirrodin, and equipped creature gets +0/+1 and equip for 1 and a white mana. Hex Gold Hover Wings is an equipment for 3 and a white mana that has, for Mirrodin, equipped creature has flying, creatures you control that are equipped get +1/+0, and equip for 2 and a white mana. Incisor Glider is a 1/3 artifact creature for 1 and a white mana that has flying, and if corrupted, when it attacks creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Indoctrination Attendant is a 3/4 Phyrexian cleric for 3 and a white mana that has Toxic 1, and when Indoctrination Attendant enters the battlefield, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Infested Fleshcutter is an equipment for 1 and a white mana with equip 2 and a white mana, and it gives the equipped creature +2/+0, and whenever it attacks, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might token with Toxic 1 that can't block. Jawbone Duelist is a 1/1 Phyrexian soldier for 1 and a white mana with Double Strike and Toxic 1. Kemba Ka Enduring is a 2/2 legendary creature cat cleric for 1 and a white mana that has, whenever Kemba Ka Enduring or another cat enters the battlefield under your control, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to that creature, and equipped creatures you control get +1/+1, and for 3 and 2 white mana, create a 2/2 white cat creature token. Leonin Lightbringer is a 3/2 cat rebel for 2 and a white mana that has Ward 2, and as long as Leonin Lightbringer is equipped, it gets +1/+1. Mandible Justiciar is an artifact creature Phyrexian cleric 2/1 for 1 and a white mana that has lifelink, and when another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Mandible Justiciar gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Miran Bardiche is an equipment for 4 and a white mana that has, for Mirrodin, equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has Vigilance, and equipped for 3 and a white mana. Mondrak Glory Dominus is a 4/4 legendary creature Phyrexian horror for 2 and 2 white mana that has, if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead, and for 1 and 2 white Phyrexian mana, sacrifice 2 other artifacts and or creatures to put an indestructible counter on Mondrak Glory Dominus. Norn's Wellspring is an artifact for 1 and a white mana that has, whenever a creature you control dies, scry 1 and put an oil counter on this, and for 1 and tap, and remove 2 oil counters from Norton's Wellspring to draw a card. Orthodoxy Enforcer is a 2/4 Phyrexian cleric for 3 and a white mana with Vigilance, and it gets +2/+0 as long as you control 2 or more artifacts. Ossification is an aura for 1 and a white mana that can enchant a land you control. It says, when this enters the battlefield, exile target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. Phyrexian Vindicator is a 5/5 Phyrexian horror for 4 white mana with flying, and if damage would be dealt to it, prevent that damage. When damage is prevented this way, Phyrexian Vindicator deals that much damage to any other target. Planar Disruption is an aura for 1 and a white mana that can enchant artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers, and the enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. Plated Onslaught is an instant with affinity for artifacts for 3 and 2 white mana that says, creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Porcelain Zealot is a 2/3 Phyrexian soldier for 3 and a white mana that says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. If that creature has Toxic, it gets +2/+2 instead. Resistance Reunited is an instant for 1 and a white mana that says, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and equipped creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Sinew Dancer is a 1/1 Phyrexian soldier for 1 white mana that has 3 and a white mana and tap to tap target creature, and if corrupted, 1 white mana and tap to tap target creature. Skrelv Defector Might is a 1/1 legendary artifact creature Phyrexian Might for a white mana. It has Toxic 1 and can't block, and 1 Phyrexian white mana and tap to choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. Skrelv's Hive is an enchantment for 1 and a white mana that says at the beginning of your upkeep you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1 and this creature can't block. And if corrupted, creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink. Swooping Lookout is a 1/2 artifact creature Phyrexian construct for 1 white mana with flying and vigilance. Vanish into Eternity is an instant for 2 and a white mana that costs 3 more if it targets a creature, and it says exile target non-land permanent. Veil of Assimilation is an artifact for 1 and a white mana that says whenever this or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains vigilance until end of turn. White Sun's Twilight is a sorcery for X and 2 white mana that says you gain X life, create X 1/1 Phyrexian Mites with Toxic 1 and they can't block, and if X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. Zealot's Conviction is an aura for 1 white mana that has Flash, Enchant Creature, enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and if corrupted, the enchanted creature gets an additional +1/+0 and first strike. Aspirant's Ascent is an instant for 1 blue mana that says until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+3 and gains flying and Toxic 1. Atmosphere Surgeon is a 2/1 Phyrexian Wizard for 1 and a blue mana that says whenever you cast a non-creature's spell, put an oil counter on this, and remove an oil counter from this, target creature gains flying until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. Blade of Shared Souls is an equipment for 2 and a blue mana that has for Mirrodin. That is, when this comes into play, create a 2/2 red rebel token, then attach this to it. It also has equip for 2, and when this becomes attached to a creature, for as long as it remains attached to it, you may have that creature become a copy of another creature you control. Blue Sun's Twilight is a sorcery for X and 2 blue that says gain control of target creature with mana value X or less. If X is 5 or more, create a copy of that creature. Bring the Ending is an instant for 1 and a blue mana that says counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, and if corrupted, counter that spell instead. Chrome Prowler is a 3/2 artifact creature Phyrexian cat for 2 and a blue mana that has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. Distorted Curiosity is a sorcery for 2 and a blue mana that costs 2 less if an opponent is corrupted, and it says draw 2 cards. Encroaching Mycosynth is an artifact for 3 and a blue mana that says non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to their other types, and the same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Escaped Experiment is a 2/1 artifact creature Phyrexian beast for 1 and a blue mana that says whenever this attacks, target creature an opponent controls gets -X/-0 until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Experimental Augury is an instant for 1 and a blue mana that says look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order, then proliferate. Eye of Malcator is an artifact for 2 and a blue mana that says when this enters the battlefield, scry 2, and it also says whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, this becomes a 4/4 Phyrexian Eye artifact creature until end of turn. Font of Progress is an artifact for 1 blue mana that says this enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it, and it has 3 and tap to have target player mill X cards, where X is the number of oil counters on Font of Progress. Gitaxian Anatomist is a 2/5 Phyrexian wizard for 3 and a blue mana that says when this enters the battlefield, you may tap it. If you do, proliferate. Gitaxian Raptor is a 1/4 Phyrexian bird for 2 and a blue mana that has flying, and this enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters on it. Remove an oil counter from this, Gitaxian Raptor gets +1/-1 until end of turn. Glistener Seer is a 0/3 Phyrexian advisor for 1 blue mana that says this enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters on it, and it has tap and remove an oil counter from this to scry 1. Ichor Synthesizer is a 1/3 Phyrexian wizard for 1 and a blue mana that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on this, and as long as this has 4 or more oil counters on it, it gets +2/+0 and can't be blocked. Ichor Moon Gauntlet is an artifact for 2 and a blue mana that says planeswalkers you control have 0 to proliferate and -12 to take an extra turn after this one. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. Chase the Perfected Mind is a planeswalker for 2, a blue mana, and a Phyrexian blue mana. It has 5 loyalty, and it is completed, which means that if you paid life instead of mana to play it, it comes into play with 2 fewer loyalty. Its abilities are +1 until your next turn, up to 1 target creature gets -3/-0, -2, target player mills 3 cards, then if a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you draw 3 cards, otherwise you draw a card. And -X, target player mills 3 times X cards. Malcator's Watcher is a 1/1 artifact creature Phyrexian drone for 1 and a blue mana with flying vigilance, and when it dies, draw a card. Meldweb Curator is a 3/4 Phyrexian wizard for 3 and a blue mana that has, when it enters the battlefield, put up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. Meldweb Strider is a 5/5 artifact vehicle for 4 and a blue mana that says Vigilance. This enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it. Remove an oil counter from this. It becomes an artifact creature until end of turn, and it has crew 3. Mercurial Spelldancer is a 2/1 Phyrexian rogue for 1 and a blue mana that has cannot be blocked, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on this, and whenever this deals damage to a player, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. If you do, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new target for the copy. Mesmering Dose is an aura for 1 and 2 blue mana that enchants a creature and says, enchanted creature doesn't untap during the untap step, and when it enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. Mindsplice Apparatus is an artifact for 3 and a blue mana that has flash, and at the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on it. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less per oil counter on this. Minor Misstep is an instant for 1 blue mana that says counter target spell with mana value 1 or less. Quicksilver Fisher is a 4/3 Phyrexian Drake for 3 and 2 blue mana with flying, and when this enters the battlefield, draw a card and discard a card. Prologue to Phyresis is an instant for 1 and a blue mana that says each opponent gets a poison counter and draw a card. Reject Imperfection is an instant for 1 and 2 blue mana that says counter target spell. If that spell's mana value was 3 or less, proliferate. Serum Snare is an instant for 1 and a blue mana that says return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If that permanent had mana value 3 or less, proliferate. Tamiyo's Immobilizer is an artifact for 3 and a blue mana that enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it, and it has tap and remove an oil counter from this to tap target artifact or creature. Tamiyo's Logbook is an artifact for 2 and a blue mana that has pay 5 and a blue mana and tap to draw a card. This ability costs 1 less for each other artifact you control. Tekuthal Inquiry Dominus is a 3/5 legendary creature Phyrexian horror for 2 and 2 blue mana that has flying, and if you would proliferate, proliferate twice instead. And then for 1 and 2 blue Phyrexian mana, remove 3 counters from among other artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers you control to put an indestructible counter on this. Thrumming Bird is a 1/1 Phyrexian bird horror for 1 and a blue mana that has flying, and when this deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. Transplant Theorist is a 2/4 artifact creature Phyrexian Artificer for 3 and a blue mana that has whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw and discard a card. And pay 2 to put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Trawler Drake is a 0/0 Phyrexian Drake for 2 and a blue mana that has flying, and this enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it. Trawler Drake gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on this. Unctus Grand Metatect is a 2/4 legendary artifact creature Phyrexian Vedalken for 1 and 2 blue mana that says, other blue creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped, draw a card, then discard a card. Other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1, and for 1 Phyrexian blue mana, until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a blue artifact in addition to its other colors and types. Activate as a sorcery. Unctus's Retrofitter is a 2/3 Phyrexian Artificer for 2 and a blue mana that has Toxic 1, and when this enters the battlefield, up to 1 target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/4 for as long as this remains on the battlefield. Vivisurgeon's Insight is a sorcery for 3 and 2 blue mana that says draw 3 cards and proliferate. Watchful Blister Zoa is a 4/4 Phyrexian Jellyfish for 4 and 2 blue mana with flying that enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it, and when it dies, draw cards equal to the number of oil counters on it. Ambulatory Edifice is a 3/2 artifact creature Phyrexian Construct for 2 and a black mana that says, when it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you do, target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Annihilating Glare is a sorcery for 1 black mana that says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, pay 4 or sacrifice an artifact or creature. And then it says, destroy target creature or planeswalker. Anoint with Affliction is an instant for 1 and a black mana that says exile target creature if it has a mana value 3 or less, and if corrupted, exile target creature instead. Archfiend of the Dross is a 6/6 Phyrexian demon for 2 and 2 black mana with flying, and it enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter from it, then if it has none, you lose the game. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. Bilios Skulldweller is a 1/1 Phyrexian insect for 1 black mana with Death Touch and Toxic 1. Black Sun's Twilight is an instant for X and a black mana that says up to 1 target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. If X is 5 or more, return target creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Blightbelly Rat is a 2/2 Phyrexian rat for 1 and a black mana that has Toxic 1, and when it dies, proliferate. Bonepicker Scourge is a 2/2 Phyrexian imp for 2 and a black mana with flying, and if corrupted, it has Death Touch and lifelink. Chittering Skitterling is a 1/4 Phyrexian rat for 2 and a black mana that has corrupted. Sacrifice an artifact or creature to draw a card. Cruel Grimnark is a 5/5 Phyrexian cleric for 5 and a black mana that has Death Touch, and when it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. For each opponent who can't, you gain 4 life. Cutthroat Centurion is a 2/2 artifact creature Phyrexian warrior for 2 and a black mana that says, sacrifice another artifact or creature to have Cutthroat Centurion get +2/+2 until end of turn, and activate only once each turn. Drivnod Carnage Dominus is an 8/3 legendary creature Phyrexian horror for 3 and 2 black mana that says, if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And then for 2 black Phyrexian mana, exile 3 creature cards from your graveyard to put an indestructible counter on Drivnod Carnage Dominus. Drown in Ichor is a sorcery for 1 and a black mana that says target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn and proliferate. Duress is a sorcery for 1 black mana that says target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-creature non-land card from it, and that player discards that card. Feed the Infection is a sorcery for 3 and a black mana that says you draw 3 cards and lose 3 life, and each corrupted opponent loses 3 life. Fleshless Gladiator is a 2/2 Phyrexian skeleton for 1 and a black mana that, if corrupted, has an ability for 2 and 1 black mana. Return Fleshless Gladiator from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. You lose 1 life. Geth, Thane of Contracts is a 3/4 legendary creature Phyrexian zombie for 1 and 2 black mana that says other creatures you control get -1/-1, and for 1 and 2 black mana and tap, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains, if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. Activate only as a sorcery. Gulping Scrap Trap is a 4/4 Phyrexian horror for 4 and 1 black mana that says, when this enters the battlefield or dies, proliferate. Infectious Inquiry is a sorcery for 2 and 1 black mana that says, you draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. Each opponent gets a poison counter. Carumonix the Rat King is a 3/3 legendary creature Phyrexian rat for 1 and 2 black mana that has Toxic 1, and other rats you control have Toxic 1, and when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal any number of rat cards from among the revealed cards and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library. Necrogen Communion is an aura for 1 and a black mana that says enchant a creature you control. That creature has Toxic 2, and when it dies, return that creature to the battlefield under your control. Necrosquito is a 0/0 Phyrexian insect for 3 and 1 black mana that has flying, and it enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. Necrosquito gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it, and whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on this. Nimraiser Paladin is a 4/4 Phyrexian knight for 4 and a black mana that has Toxic 2, and when it enters the battlefield, return target creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to your hand. Offer Immortality is an instant for 1 and a black mana that says target creature gains Death Touch and indestructible until end of turn. Pestilence Siphoner is a 1/1 Phyrexian insect for 1 and a black mana that has flying and Toxic 1. Phyrexian Arena is a reprint. It is an enchantment for 1 and 2 black mana that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card and lose 1 life. Phyrexian Obliterator is also a reprint. It is a 5/5 Phyrexian horror for 4 black mana with trample and says, whenever a source deals damage to it, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. And if you're finding this video useful, please obliterate those like and subscribe buttons. Ravenous Necrotitan is a 6/6 Phyrexian horror for 2 and 2 black mana that makes you sacrifice a creature when it comes into play unless an opponent has corrupted. Scheming Aspirant is a 1/3 Phyrexian advisor for 1 and a black mana that says, whenever you proliferate, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Sheoldred's Edict is an instant for 1 and a black mana that says, choose 1. Each opponent sacrifices a creature, or each opponent sacrifices a creature token, or each opponent sacrifices a planeswalker. Sheoldred's Head Cleaver is a 2/4 Phyrexian warrior for 3 and a black mana that has Menace and Toxic 2. Stinging Hivemaster is a 3/2 Phyrexian warlock for 2 and 1 black mana with Toxic 1, and when this dies, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Testament Bearer is a 4/1 Phyrexian warrior for 3 and 1 black mana with, when this dies, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Vat Emergence is a sorcery for 4 and 1 black mana that says put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control and proliferate. Vat of Rebirth is an artifact for 1 black mana that says, whenever another artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Vat of Rebirth. And then for 2 and 1 black mana and tap, remove 4 oil counters from Vat of Rebirth to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. Vran Executioner Thane is a 2/2 legendary creature Phyrexian vampire for 1 and a black mana that says, whenever one or more other creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This ability triggers only once each turn. Vraska Betrayal's Sting is a planeswalker that has 6 loyalty for 4 and a black mana and a Phyrexian black mana. It is completed and it has +0, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Proliferate. -2, target creature becomes a treasure token. And -9, if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of counters equal to the difference, which is a fancy way of saying target player now has 9 poison counters. Vraska's Fall is an instant for 2 and 1 black mana that says each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker and gets a poison counter. Whisper of the Dross is an instant for 1 black mana that says target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn and proliferate. All Will Be One is an enchantment for 3 and 2 red mana that says whenever you put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to target opponent creature an opponent controls or planeswalker an opponent controls. Awaken the Sleeper is a sorcery for 3 and 1 red mana that says gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap it. It gains haste until end of turn. If it's equipped, you may destroy all equipment attached to that creature. Axiom Engraver is a 1/3 Phyrexian wizard for 1 and a red mana that enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it, and has tap, remove an oil counter from Axiom Engraver, discard a card, 2, draw a card. Barbed Batterfist is an equipment for 1 and a red mana that has for Mirrodin, and equipped creature gets +1/-1, and equip for 1. Bladegraft Aspirant is a 2/3 Phyrexian warrior for 2 and 1 red mana with menace, and equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and activated abilities of equipment you control that target Bladegraft Aspirant cost 1 less to activate. Blazing Crescendo is an instant for 1 and a red mana that says target creature gets +3/+1 until end of turn, and exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. Cacophony Scamp is a 1/1 Phyrexian Goblin Warrior for 1 red mana that says, whenever this deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it. If you do, proliferate. When this dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Capricious Hellraiser is a 4/4 Phyrexian Dragon for 3 and 3 red that costs 3 less to cast if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. It has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard. Choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them, and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying for it. Chimney Rabble is a 3/3 Phyrexian Goblin Warrior for 3 and 1 red mana with haste, and when it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. Churning Reservoir is an artifact for 1 red mana that says at the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on another target non-token artifact or creature you control. And then it has, for 2 and tap, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. Activate only if an oil counter was removed from a permanent you controlled this turn, or a permanent with an oil counter on it was put into a graveyard this turn. Dragonwing Glider is an equipment for 3 and 2 red mana that has for Mirrodin, and equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and haste, and then it has equip for 3 and 2 red mana. Exuberant Fuseling is a 0/1 Phyrexian Goblin Warrior for 1 red mana that has trample, and it gets +1/+0 for each oil counter on it. When Exuberant Fuseling enters the battlefield, and whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Exuberant Fuseling. Forgehammer Centurion is a 3/2 Phyrexian warrior for 2 and a red mana that says, whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on this. And whenever Forgehammer Centurion attacks, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. When you do, target creature can't block this turn. Free from Flesh is an instant for 1 red mana that says target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn and put 2 oil counters on it. Furnace Punisher is a 3/3 Phyrexian warrior for 2 and a red mana that has menace, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, This deals 2 damage to that player unless they control 2 or more basic lands. Furnace Strider is a 4/5 Phyrexian beast for 4 and 1 red mana that says this enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it, and remove an oil counter from this to have target creature you control gain haste until end of turn. Gleeful Demolition is a sorcery for 1 red mana that says destroy target artifact. If you control it, create 3 1/1 Phyrexian goblin tokens. Hazardous Blast is a sorcery for 3 and 1 red mana that says it deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control, and creatures your opponents control can't block this turn. Hexgold Halberd is an equipment for 1 and a red mana that has 4 Mirrodin, and as long as it's your turn, equipped creature has First Strike and Trample, equipped for 2 and 1 red mana. Hexgold's Slash is an instant for 1 red mana that deals 2 to target creature or 4 if that creature has Toxic. Koth, Fire of Resistance is a planeswalker with 4 loyalty for 2 and 2 red mana. It has +2, search your library for a basic mountain card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. -3, Koth, Fire of Resistance deals damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control. And -7, you get an emblem with whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, this emblem deals 4 damage to any target. Kuldotha Cackler is a 2/3 Phyrexian hyena for 2 and 1 red mana with trample, and whenever this attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. Magmatic Sprinter is a 3/2 Phyrexian warrior for 2 and a red mana that has haste, and when it enters the battlefield, put 2 oil counters on target artifact or creature you control. And at the beginning of your end step, return this to its owner's hand unless you remove 2 oil counters from it. Molten Rebuke is a sorcery for 4 and 1 red mana that has choose one or both. Molten Rebuke deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker and or destroy target equipment. Nahiri's Sacrifice is a sorcery for 1 and a red mana that has as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature with mana value X. Nahiri's Sacrifice deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. Oxida Finisher is a 7/5 Ogre Rebel for 5 and 2 red mana that has affinity for equipment and trample. Rebel Salvo is an instant for 2 and 1 red mana that has affinity for equipment, and Rebel Salvo deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker. That permanent loses indestructible until end of turn. Red Sun's Twilight is a sorcery for X and 2 red mana that says destroy up to X target artifacts. If X is 5 or more, for each artifact destroyed this way, create a token that's a copy of it. Those tokens gain haste and exile them at the beginning of the next end step. Resistance Skywarden is a 5/5 Ogre Rebel for 3 and 2 red mana that has Menace and Reach. Soulblade's Scamp is a 1/1 Phyrexian beast for 1 red mana with haste, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it, and tap and remove an oil counter from it to deal 1 damage to each opponent. Shrapnel Slinger is a 2/2 artifact creature Phyrexian beast for 1 and a red mana that says when this enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, destroy target artifact an opponent controls. Slowbat Iron Goblin is a 3/3 legendary creature Phyrexian Goblin Artificer for 2 and a red mana that has tap it and sacrifice an artifact to add an amount of red mana equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. Solfim Mayhem Dominus is a 5/4 legendary creature Phyrexian Horror for 2 and 2 red mana, and it says, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. And then it has, for 1 and 2 red Phyrexian mana, discard 2 cards, put an indestructible counter on Solfim Mayhem Dominus. Thrill of Possibility is an instant for 1 and a red mana that says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card. Draw 2 cards. Urabrask's Anointer is a 4/2 artifact creature Phyrexian wizard for 3 and a red mana that has, whenever this enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. Urabrask's Forge is an artifact for 2 and a red mana that says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on this, then create an X1 Phyrexian Horror token with Trample and Haste, where X is the amount of oil counters on this. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. Vindictive Flamestoker is a 1/2 Phyrexian wizard for 1 red mana that has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on this. And 6 and a red, and sacrifice this. Discard your hand, then draw 4 cards. This ability costs 1 less for each oil counter on this. Volt Charge is an instant for 2 and a red mana that says deal 3 damage to any target and proliferate. Volshock Splitter is an equipment for 3 and a red mana that has equip for 2 and a red mana, and for Mirrodin, and equipped creature gets +2/+0. Adaptive Spore Singer is a 2/2 Phyrexian Druid for 2 and 1 green mana that has Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Target creature gets +2/+2 and Vigilance until end of turn, or proliferate. Armored Scrapgorger is a 0/3 Phyrexian Beast for 1 and a green mana that says, this gets +3/+0 as long as it has 3 or more oil counters on it. It taps to add 1 mana of any color, and whenever this becomes tapped, exile target card from a graveyard and put an oil counter on this. Bloated Contaminator is a 4/4 Phyrexian Beast for 2 and a green mana with Trample, Toxic 1, and when it deals damage to a player, proliferate. Branchblight Stalker is a 3/1 Phyrexian Elf Scout for 1 and a green mana that has Toxic 2. Cankerbloom is a 3/2 Phyrexian Fungus for 1 and a green mana that says 1 and sacrifice Cankerbloom to choose 1. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or proliferate. Carnivorous Canopy is a sorcery for 2 and 1 green mana that says destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. If that permanent's mana value was 3 or less, proliferate. Conduit of Worlds is an artifact for 2 and 2 green mana that says that you can play lands from your graveyard and tap to choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast more spells this turn. Activate at sorcery speed. Contagious Vorak is a 3/3 Phyrexian Boar Beast for 2 and 1 green mana that says, when this enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you didn't put a card into your hand this way, proliferate. Copper Longlegs is a 1/3 Phyrexian Spider for 1 and a green mana that has Reach, and 1 and a green, and sacrifice Copper Longlegs to proliferate. Evolved Spinoderm is a 5/5 Phyrexian Beast for 2 and 2 green mana that says, this enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it. It has Trample as long as it has 2 or fewer counters on it. Otherwise, it has Hexproof. And at the beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter from it, and if it has none left, sacrifice it. Evolving Adaptive is a 0/0 Phyrexian Warrior for 1 green mana that enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it. This gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than Evolving Adaptive, put an oil counter on Evolving Adaptive. Expand the Sphere is a sorcery for 3 and a green mana that says, look at the top 6 cards of your library. Put up to 2 land cards from among those cards onto the battlefield tapped and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. If you put fewer than 2 lands onto play, proliferate a number of times equal to the difference. Green Sun's Twilight is a sorcery for X and a green mana that says, reveal X +1 cards from the top of your library. Choose a creature card and or land from among them. Put these cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library. If X is 5 or more, instead you may put the chosen cards onto the battlefield. Ickerspit Basilisk is a 1/3 Phyrexian Basilisk for 2 and 1 green mana with Death Touch and Toxic 1. Incubation Sac is an artifact for 1 green mana that enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters on it. For 4, tap and remove an oil counter from this. Create a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature token. activate as a sorcery. Infectious Bite is an instant for 1 and a green mana that says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Each opponent gets a poison counter. Lattice Blade Mantis is a 4/3 Phyrexian insect for 3 and 1 green mana that enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. Whenever this attacks, you may remove an oil counter from it. If you do, untap it and it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Maze's Mantle is an aura for 2 and 1 green mana. It has Flash, Enchant Creature, and when this enters the battlefield, if enchanted creature has Toxic, that creature gains Hexproof until end of turn. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2. Nissa Ascended Animist is a planeswalker with 7 loyalty for 3 and 2 green and 2 Phyrexian green mana. It is completed, and her abilities are +1, create an XX green Phyrexian horror token where X is Nissa's loyalty. Holy shit. -1, destroy target artifact or enchantment. And -7, until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 for each forest you control and gain trample. Noxious Assault is a sorcery for 3 and 2 green mana that says creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn, and whenever a creature blocks this turn, its controller gets a poison counter. Oil Gorger Troll is a 3/4 Phyrexian Troll Warrior for 3 and 2 green mana. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life. Then if you control a permanent with an oil counter on it, draw a card. Paladin of Predation is a 6/7 Phyrexian Knight for 5 and 2 green mana with Toxic 6 that can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Plague Nurse is a 3/4 Phyrexian Cleric for 3 and 1 green mana with Toxic 2, and for 2 and 1 green mana, each other creature you control with Toxic gains Toxic 1 until end of turn. Activate only once each turn. Predation Steward is a 2/2 Phyrexian Elf Warrior for 1 and a green mana. It enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it, and it has 2 and 1 green and tap. Remove an oil counter from Predation Steward to have target creature get +2/+2 until end of turn. Activate as a sorcery. Rustvine Cultivator is a 1/2 Phyrexian Elf Druid for 1 green mana. It has tap, put an oil counter on Rustvine Cultivator, and tap. Remove an oil counter from Rustvine Cultivator, untap target land. Ruthless Predation is a sorcery for 1 and a green mana. It has target creature you control gets +1/+2 until end of turn. It fights target creature you don't control. Sky Scythe Engulfer is a 6/5 Phyrexian Beast for 5 and 1 green mana. It has reach, trample, and can't be blocked by creatures with flying. Silvok Battlechair is an equipment for 4 and 2 green mana. It has for Mirrodin. Equipped creature gets +4/+4 and has trample, and equipped for 5 and 2 green mana. Thirsting Roots is a sorcery for 1 green mana. It says, choose one. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand and shuffle, or proliferate. Thron, Breaker of Silence is a 5/5 legendary creature, troll, shaman, for 3 and 2 green mana that can't be countered. It has trample, and can't be the target of non-green spells your opponents control or abilities from non-green sources your opponents control. As long as it's your turn, Thron has Indestructible. Titanic Growth is an instant for 1 and a green mana that says target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. Tyrannax Atrocity is a 4/4 Phyrexian dinosaur for 3 and 2 green mana with haste and Toxic 3. Tyrannax Rex is here to ruin every blue player's day. It is an 8/8 Phyrexian dinosaur for 4 and 3 green mana, and it can't be countered, and has haste, and ward 4, and trample, and toxic 4, and it is big and bad, and it's hangry. Tiber's Stand is an instant for X and a green mana that says target creature you control gets +X/+X and gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Unnatural Restoration is a sorcery for 1 and a green mana that says return target card from your graveyard to your hand, then proliferate. Venerated Rot Priest is a 1/2 Phyrexian druid for 1 green mana with Toxic 1, and whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. Venomous Brutalizer is a 4/4 Phyrexian knight for 2 and 2 green mana with Toxic 3, and when this enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and 1 green mana. If you do, proliferate. Viral Spawning is a sorcery for 2 and a green mana that says create a 3/3 green Phyrexian beast creature token with toxic 1, and if corrupted it has flashback for 2 and a green mana. Zopandrel Hunger Dominus is a 4/6 legendary creature Phyrexian horror for 5 and 2 green mana. It has reach, and at the beginning of each combat double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. And then, for 2 green Phyrexian mana, it has sacrifice 2 other creatures, put an indestructible counter on Zopandrel Hunger Dominus. Atraxa Great Unifier is a 7/7 legendary creature Phyrexian Angel for 3 and a green, a white, a blue, and a black mana with flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink. And when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. And for each card type, you may put one of those cards of those types into your hand. Put the remaining cards at the bottom of your library. Bladehold Warwhip is an equipment for 1 and a red and a white mana with an equip cost of 3 and a red and a white mana. It has 4 Mirrodin, and equip abilities you activate of other equipments cost 1 less to activate, and equipped creature has double strike. Cephalopod Sentry is a star 5 artifact creature Phyrexian squid for 2 and a white and a blue mana that has flying, and its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. Charforger is a 2/3 Phyrexian beast for 1, a black and a red mana that says when this enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 Phyrexian goblin creature token. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a null counter on this, and remove 3 oil counters from this to exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Cinderslash Ravager is a 5/5 Phyrexian warrior for 4, a red, and a green mana. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each permanent you control with oil counters on it. Vigilance. And when this enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Ezuri, Stalker of the Spheres, is a 3/3 legendary creature Phyrexian elf warrior for 2 and a green and a blue mana. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3, and if you do, proliferate twice. And it has, whenever you proliferate, draw a card. Glissa Sunslayer is a 3/3 legendary creature Phyrexian zombie elf for 1 and a black and a green mana with first strike and death touch. With whenever Glissa Sunslayer deals combat damage to a player, choose 1, draw a card and lose 1 life, destroy target enchantment, or remove up to 3 counters from target permanent. Jor Kadeen, First Gold Warden, is a 2/2 legendary creature human rebel for a red and a white mana with trample, and whenever this attacks it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of equipped creatures you control. Then, if this has power 4 or greater, draw a card. Kaito Dancing Shadow is a planeswalker with 3 loyalty for 2 and a blue and a black mana that has, whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may return 1 of them to its owner's hand. If you do, you may activate loyalty abilities of Kaito twice this turn, and its loyalty abilities are +1, up to 1 target creature can't attack or block until your next turn, 0, draw a card, -2, create a 2/2 drone artifact token with death touch, and when this leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. Kaya Intangible Slayer is a planeswalker that comes into play with 6 loyalty for 3 and 2 white and 2 black mana. It has hexproof, and her loyalty abilities are +2, each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. 0 to draw 2 cards, then each opponent may scry 1, and -3, exile target creature or enchantment. If it wasn't an aura, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 1/1 white spirit creature with flying. Kethek Crucible Goliath is a 4/4 legendary creature Phyrexian beast for 2 and a black and a red mana. It has, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary creature card with lesser mana value. Put it into the battlefield, then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Basically a variation of Cascade. Luca, Bound to Ruin, is a planeswalker with 5 loyalty for 2, a red, a Phyrexian red or green, and a green mana that's completed, and its abilities are +1, add a red and a green, spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. -1, create a 3/3 Phyrexian Beast token with Toxic 1, and -4, Luca deals X damage divided as you choose among creatures and/or planeswalkers, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Malagator, Purity Overseer, is a 1/1 legendary creature Phyrexian elephant wizard for 1, a white and a blue mana that says, when this enters the battlefield, create a 3/3 golem, and at the beginning of your end step, if 3 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control this turn, create a 3/3 golem. Melira the Living Cure is a 3/3 legendary creature human scout for a green and a white mana that says, if you would get 1 or more poison counters on you, you only get 1 and can't get more this turn. Exile Melira to choose another target creature or artifact, and when that's put into a graveyard this turn, return it to the battlefield. Miglo's Maze Crusher is a 4/4 legendary creature Phyrexian beast for 1, a red and a green mana that says, this enters the battlefield with 5 oil counters on it. 1. Remove an oil counter from this. It gains vigilance and menace until end of turn. 2. Remove 2 oil counters from this. It gets +2/+2 until end of turn. 3. Remove 3 oil counters on this. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Nahiri the Unforgiving is a planeswalker with 5 loyalty for 1, a red, a Phyrexian red or white, and a white mana that's completed, and her abilities are +1 until your next turn up to 1 target creature attacks a player each combat if able. +1 discard and draw a card. 0 exile target creature or equipment card with mana value less than Nahiri's loyalty from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it. That token gets haste and exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Necrogen Rot Priest is a 1/5 Phyrexian zombie cleric. For 2, a black and a green mana, it has Toxic 2, and whenever a creature you control with Toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gains an additional poison counter. For 1, a black and a green mana, target creature you control with Toxic gains Death Touch until end of turn. Ovika Enigma Goliath is a 6/6 legendary creature Phyrexian Nightmare for 5 and a blue and a red mana, with flying and ward 3 and pay 3 life, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an X/1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin tokens, where X is the mana value of that spell, with haste. Rhea Ivor, Bane of Bladehold, is a 3/4 legendary creature Phyrexian Knight for 2, a white and a black mana that has Battlecry. When this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, the next time target creature would deal combat damage to 1 or more players this combat, prevent that damage. If damage is prevented this way, create that many 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Serum Core Chimera is a 2/4 Phyrexian Chimera for 2, a blue and a red mana. It has flying, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on this. Remove 3 oil counters from this, draw a card. Then you may discard a non-land card. When you discard a card this way, this deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Activate as a sorcery. Slaughter Singer is a 2/2 Phyrexian cleric for a green and a white mana with Toxic 2, and whenever another creature you control with Toxic attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. The 2/3 Phyrexian bird for 1, a green and a blue mana with flying Toxic 1, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. If you do, proliferate. Tyvar, Jubilant Brawler, is a planeswalker with 3 loyalty for 1, a black and a green mana that says, you may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste, and +1, untap up to 1 target creature, and -2, mill 3 cards, then you may return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Venser, Corpse Puppet, is a 1/3 legendary creature Phyrexian zombie wizard for a blue and a black mana with lifelink and toxic 1, and whenever you proliferate, choose 1. If you don't control a creature named the Hollow Sentinel, create a legendary 3/3 golem named as such, or target artifact creature you control gains flying and lifelink until end of turn. Vivisection Evangelist is a 4/4 Phyrexian cleric for 3, a white and a black mana with vigilance, and if corrupted, when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Voidwing Hybrid is a 2/1 Phyrexian bat for a blue and a black mana. It has flying toxic 1, and when you proliferate, return this from your graveyard to your hand. Argentum Massacre is a 5/5 artifact creature Phyrexian Massacre for 5. It has first strike protection from multicolored, and at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this unless you discard a card. When you discard a card this way, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to the mana value of the discarded card. Atraxa's Skitterfang is a 2/2 artifact creature Phyrexian insect for 3 that enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters on it, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may remove an oil counter from it. If you do, target creature you control gains flying, vigilance, death touch, or lifelink until end of turn. A Skullbump to draw a card, and 2 and a white mana, sacrifice Basilica Skullbump. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains flying until end of turn. Draw a card, activate only as a sorcery. Dross Skullbump is an artifact for 1. It has 1 sacrifice Dross Skullbump to draw a card, and 2 and a black, sacrifice Dross Skullbump to return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Draw a card, activate as a sorcery. Dune Mover is a 2/1 artifact creature Phyrexian Golem for 2. It has toxic 1. And when this enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. The Filigree Silex is a legendary artifact for 2, and it has tap to put an oil counter on it, and tap and sacrifice the Filigree Silex to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of oil counters on it, and tap and remove 10 oil counters from among permanents you control, and sacrifice the Silex to deal 10 damage to anything. Furnace Skullbump is an artifact for 1, and it has 1. Sacrifice Furnace Skullbump to draw a card. 1 and a red mana, sacrifice Skullbump to put 2 oil counters on target artifact or creature you control. Draw a card and activate only as a sorcery. Graz Unstoppable Juggernaut is a 7/5 legendary artifact creature Juggernaut for 8 that says, Juggernauts attack each turn if able and can't be blocked by walls, and other creatures you control are 5/3 Juggernauts in addition to their other types. Ickerplate Golem is a 2/3 artifact creature Phyrexian Golem for 3 that says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it has 1 or more oil counters on it, put an oil counter on it. And creatures you control with oil counters on them gain +1/+1. Maze Skullbump is an artifact for 1. It has 1 sacrifice Maze Skullbump to draw a card, and 2 and a green sacrifice Maze Skullbump to have target creature you control get +3/+3 and trample until end of turn, and draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery. Mirren Safehouse is an artifact for 3 that says, as long as Mirren Safehouse is on the battlefield, it has the activated abilities of all land cards in all graveyards. Monument to Perfection is an artifact for 2 that says, 3 and tap to search your library for a basic, sphere, or locus land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And 3 to have this become a 9/9 Phyrexian construct artifact creature. It loses all abilities and gains indestructible and toxic 9. Activate only if there are 9 or more land cards with different names among the basic, locus, and spheres you control. Mere Convert is a 2/1 artifact creature Phyrexian Mere for 2 with Toxic 1 and tap and pay 2 life to add 1 mana of any color. Custodian is a 2/3 artifact creature Mere for 3. It has, when this enters the battlefield, scry 2, then each opponent may scry 1. Mere Kinsmith is a 3/1 artifact creature Mere for 4. It has, when this enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a Mere card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Phyrexian Atlas is an artifact for 3. It has tap to add 1 mana of any color, and if corrupted, when this becomes tapped, each opponent who is corrupted loses 1 life. Prophetic Prism is an artifact for 2. It has, when this enters the battlefield, draw a card and 1 and tap to add 1 mana of any color. Prosthetic Injector is an equipment for 1. It has equipped creature gets +0/+2 and has Toxic 1, and it equips for 1. Ripskiff is a 4/4 vehicle for 4 with Toxic 2, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card and crew for 3. Soulless Jailer is a 0/4 artifact creature Phyrexian Golem for 2. It has permanent cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield, and players can't cast non-creature spells from graveyards or exile. Staff of Completion is an artifact for 3 and has 5 abilities that say: tap and pay 1 life to destroy target permanent you own. Tap and pay 2 life to add 1 mana of any color. Tap and pay 3 life to proliferate. Tap and pay 4 life to draw a card, and pay 5 mana to untap it. Surgical Skullbomb is an artifact for 1. It has 1, sacrifice Surgical Skullbomb to draw a card, and 2 and a blue mana, sacrifice Surgical Skullbomb to return target creature to its owner's hand and draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery. Sword of Forge and Frontier is an equipment for 3 that has equip for 2, and equipped creature gets +2/+2 and protection from red and green. And whenever it deals damage to a player, exile the top 2 cards from your library. You may play them this turn, and you may play an additional land this turn. Tablet of Completion is an artifact for 2. It has tap, put an oil counter on this, tap, add a colorless, activate only if this has 2 or more oil counters on it, and pay 1 and tap, draw a card, activate only if this has 5 or more oil counters on it. Zenith Chronicler is a 3/1 artifact creature Phyrexian construct for 2 that says that whenever a player casts their first multicolored spell each turn, each other player draws a card. The Autonomous Furnace is a land sphere. It enters the battlefield tapped and taps to add 1 red mana, and it has 1 and a red mana and tap. Sacrifice the Autonomous Furnace to draw a card. The Dross Pits is a land sphere. It enters the battlefield tapped and taps to add 1 black mana and a black mana and tap and sacrifice the Dross Pits to draw a card. The Fair Basilica is the land sphere. It enters the battlefield tapped. It taps to add 1 white mana, and it has 1 and a white mana and tap and sacrifice the Fair Basilica to draw a card. The Hunter Maze is a land sphere that comes into play tapped and taps to add 1 green mana. It has 1 a green mana, tap and sacrifice the Hunter's Maze to draw a card. Mirex is a land sphere that taps to add 1 colorless mana, and it has tap, add 1 mana of any color, activate only if this entered the battlefield this turn, and it has 3 and tap, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. The Monumental Facade is a land sphere that enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it and taps for a colorless mana, and also has tap and remove an oil counter from it to put 1 on an artifact or creature you control as a sorcery. The Seed Core is a land sphere that adds a colorless and also taps for a mana of any color that you can only spend on Phyrexian creature spells, and if corrupted, it also has tap to give target 1/1 creature +2/+1 until end of turn. The Surgical Bay is a land sphere that comes into play tapped. It taps to add 1 blue mana, and it has 1 and a blue mana and tap and sacrifice the Surgical Bay to draw a card. Terramorphic Expanse is a land that taps and sacrifice the Terramorphic Expanse to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And finally, we are getting a reprint of the 5 allied fast lands. These are lands that come into play tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. And that's going to be it for the video. If you've watched until now, thank you very much. Please consider leaving a like or a sub, and I'll see you on the next one.